and welcome to my craft room. I'm Leo from inkymemories.co.uk, an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator based in South Wales, and today on this Tip Tuesday we're going to be talking about different colouring methods. Now this is going to be part one of a roughly 3-part series, I think, on different colouring methods and different ways to use colour from Stampin' Up. And today we're going to be focusing mostly on watercolouring and watercolour techniques using some of the different things that I have laid out here. There's quite a few different products that we're going to be looking at today, so I'm just going to pull in the catalogue and walk you through a couple of those and where you can find them. So the majority of these things can be found on page 144 to 147 in the annual catalogue. So first of all we have here the watercolour pencils, and these come in 2 different colour assortments with different shades in each, and again these all coordinate with our standard ink colours in our Stampin' Up colour families. Everything always coordinates together. On this page then we have a lot of the other tools that we're going to be using. So some of the things that we're going to be looking at specifically today are the Wink of Stella brush, Stays on Ink and the water painters, blender pens, and then we're going to also look at a couple of different types of cardstock for using for your images. Now I've got 3 different types of cardstock using today. The first one is our watercolour paper. Hopefully you can see the texture on this paper. It is a nice textured paper, really fantastic for using for watercolouring techniques. I have just some classic Whisper White cardstock here, so nice and simple, and this is just the regular weight. And then I also have some shimmery cardstock, and you might just be able to see the shimmer in there if I move it around for you. This is slightly thicker than the Whisper White, slightly heavier weight, and again this is really great for watercolouring. And all of those can be found on the Paper Basics page, which is 153 in the annual catalogue. So you've got here the Fluid 100 watercolour paper, and then your A4 cardstock in shimmery white and Whisper White. Okay, so now we've gone through a couple of the different tools we're going to be using, let's have a look at some of the techniques. Like I said, today we're going to be looking at watercolouring specifically. So all of these things are going to be using standard ink or watercolour pencils and generally water. So I've got a couple of different options for ink. I've got our stamping refills, so I have here Poppy Parade and Shaded Spruce. And I also have just a classic stamping pad in Mossy Meadow. I have the 2 different sets of watercolour pencils, so assortment 1 and assortment 2, with the different shades in each. I've got the water painters here, so these are just a brush tip, so there's a couple of different tips on these. So you've got a fine one, a medium one, and then like a nice big wedge tip. And you literally just unscrew the barrels on these, and you can see I've filled these with some water, ready for use shortly. I also then have the Wink of Stella brush, which we used recently in the mini card that I did. And this is literally just a clear ink filled with sort of a very fine shimmery glitter. It's slightly gold in hue, but not too much. Really great for doing a lot of different things, and we're going to be using this today as a watercolouring technique. And then I also have a blender pen. Now this is just a pen that has 2 tips on the end, both just standard brush tips. They're fairly firm, not too flexible. And these are filled with a sort of solution that just helps to blend your edges basically. And again, this is really good for using with especially the watercolour pencils, which is what we're going to be doing today. So to that end, I've done a little bit of stamping already. Using the Christmas Gleaming stamp set, I've used this sort of holly, leaf and berry image, and I've stamped this a couple of times on all of the different types of cardstock that we're going to be using. So there is watercolour paper, the Whisper White and the shimmery white, and we're going to use a couple of different techniques on each so you can see how they all come about. And one thing I will note, the ink that I've stamped with here is Stays On. Now, this is a solvent or alcohol based ink, and the reason that I've used this one specifically today is because we are using water and watercolouring techniques. This won't affect the lines of the stamp, so the alcohol won't be affected by the water that we're going to be using. If you particularly want a watercolour look, you can stamp using our classic stamping pads. So you can perhaps do it in one of the paler neutral colours, such as Sahara Sand or Grey Granite. And then as you watercolour over it, the edges will actually blend into your piece. You won't actually have any edges if that's the kind of look that you're going for. But today I wanted crisp outlines, so I've used StazOn. Now with the StazOn ink, because it is alcohol based, you do need to clean your stamps in a slightly different way. There is a separate cleaner specifically for StazOn ink, so StazOn cleaner comes in a little bottle like this with a little sort of brush tip on the end, and you literally just rub this over the surface of the stamp once you're finished using it, and it helps to start breaking down that ink. And then all I do is, using stamping mist and my stamping scrub, just clean the stamp as normal from that point. Okay, so let me move some of these things out of the way and we shall get started with some watercolour pencils. Okay, so I've taken out a couple of very classic Christmas colours here. So I've got Real Red and Old Olive, and this is from the original assortment of watercolour pencils. And all I'm going to do is to start drawing within the lines on a couple of my images. I'm going to do this on two different cardstocks so you can see the different sort of textures and things that come from this. So I'm going to start with Real Red, and using the Fluid 100 water paper, all I'm going to do is just start laying down colour. So starting with my Holly Berries. And you can adjust the pressure if you want a darker colour. Obviously you can press much firmer. If you want it to be lighter, you can press a lot lighter, and you can actually build up sort of shadowing and so on by doing this as well. So add in where the darker colour would be, sort of where the berries meet in the middle. Okay, and then switching to Old Olive, we'll start filling in the leaves, so exactly the same, just laying down a nice base of colour. And with that Old Olive there, I've just gone a little bit darker up sort of the veins of the leaves. I'm going to repeat this again using the same colours on the standard Whisper White cardstock. Okay, so let's add two coloured images. So we've got standard Whisper White cardstock and the watercolour paper. So first of all, I'm going to take one of my water painters. This is just the sort of larger of the two brush tips. And with this and some handy kitchen towel, I'm going to squeeze some of the water into the barrel just to get the tip flowing. So you can see the sponge in here starting to darken up. And that should start to get your water flowing through there. And then all you do is you literally just start to paint with the pencil to blend all of that colour together. It helps to give it a much more sort of uniform look. And because this is watercolour paper, it will take the water really nicely. It won't sort of ball up too much underneath. And you can go back over it. You can lift more colour off if you want to. You can blend the colour in darker in places, exactly as you would if you were watercolouring. And just clean the brush off, ready to use for the next colour. Then I'm going to take the finer one just for the berries. So again, just prime it by squeezing some of the water into the tip. And then blend our berries in nicely. So that is our watercoloured image using the watercolour pencils and blended then with the water painters. For the next one then that I did on the standard Whisper White cardstock, I'm actually going to use the blender pen for this. So I'm just going to rub this off here, make sure there's no ink left on this from last time I used it. And then exactly as we did with the water painters, I'm literally just going to use the pen to start to blend my pencil lines. And you'll notice that where they were sort of scratchy, as colouring with pencil sometimes gives you those sort of lines in your artwork, this helps to really sort of blend and soften that. And you can then use the ink that's left on the tip and actually start moving it around where you want it to go. So if you do want to darken up some areas, you can lay extra ink into those. Then just clean off the tip onto a piece of scrap paper or grid paper until you don't get any more colour coming off, and then you can move on to the next colour. And there is our finished image on the standard Whisper White cardstocks. This is with watercolour pencils and a blender pen. So exactly the same colour with the two pencils on there, but very different techniques, and they do end up looking very different in the finished product. So the next thing that we're going to move on to then is using some ink. So let me just switch everything out. Okay, so next thing we're going to be using then is some of our regular ink. Now I've got two different ways of doing this, either in ink pad, or if you have a refill, we can use a refill. I'm going to bring in a couple of clear blocks over here. I'm going to actually use these as basically like my mixing palettes. So using the ink, I'm literally just going to put a single drop of ink directly onto my clear block. So that one is Poppy Parade. And then again with the shaded Spruce. And then using the ink pad, all I'm going to do is just lightly squeeze this in the middle a couple of times. And then when you actually open the ink pad up, you've got a little well of ink in the bottom. And again, you can use that as your mixing palette. So I'm going to go back to the watercolour paper for this, and also the shimmery white cardstock this time. I'm bringing back in again our aqua painters, so I've got the two brush tips for this one. I'm going to start first of all with the ink on here. So what I'm going to do is squeeze this a little bit harder this time. And what I'm trying to do here is just get a drop of water to actually come through the brush, there we go, and into the ink. And then you can decide from there how strong you want the ink to be. And then you just take it to your project and start painting. Once the paper is wet, you can actually move the ink around in a couple of different ways. So you can take just the solid ink from the middle of the block. You can take the sort of more watered down part from the edge and vary the tones and colours that you're getting from that. So then I shall do the berries. I'm going to do this in exactly the same way. So just squeezing the barrel of the water painter until I get a drop of water coming through. And then using that to pick up colour and paint it directly onto the project. And again, just using the sort of less dilute ink at the centre of the spot. And you can then add in the shading that you need or want to have, using the sort of darker and lighter of those colours. And then just again clean off your painter. Red is obviously a little bit more staining on some kitchen towel. So that was the watercolour with ink directly onto the watercolour paper. So again, there is our finished watercoloured image. And I'm going to do something very similar onto the shimmery white cardstock. So you can see this has that sort of subtle shimmer in there already. And we're going to go back to the fatter of the two aqua painters, and this time I'm going to use the Mossy Meadow ink. So in exactly the same way that I did with my ink blocks up here, I'm just going to squeeze a drop of water through the brush into that pool of ink that I've made in here. And using that then, I can start painting my image. I'm going to move on with the smaller one and into my red again. And do exactly the same. And there is our second image done. So this is on the shimmery white cardstock. So the shimmer does subtly come through after you've coloured this in, so you will still see some of that shimmer. Not a huge amount, it is fairly subtle. And just going back to the ink, so even though we've obviously pretty much drowned this with a lot of watery ink, you can see that the stamped image is staying nice and crisp in the background. It hasn't bled at all, even though some of the ink has bled over the edges of it slightly, where I've added a little bit too much water. And also the cardstock is holding up really nicely with this. This shimmery white cardstock is very good with the watercolour. It doesn't sort of pile or ball up at all while you're using it. The same also then on the plain Whisper White. That will also hold up really nicely with your watercolour. I'm going to do something a little bit different on this one. So I'm going to take another drop of my red ink this time onto another clear block. And this time I'm going to bring in my Wink of Stella brush. Now again, this has a part that you can squeeze to sort of bring the ink through. I'm going to squeeze a little bit of this ink through the nib. This may take a little while to come through. You do have to be a little bit patient with this one. There we go. And I'm going to use this ink to water down my red ink this time, and then use it exactly as I would with the water painters to colour in my image. And just wipe the brush off in exactly the same way to get rid of any of the coloured ink, and that's ready to use again. And then you can see our gorgeous frosted berries on there. This is also a really nice way of adding ink to, say, the end of candles. If you have sort of the flame part of a candle, paint that in yellow using the Wink of Stella. It just gives it that little bit extra on there. Okay, so here are all of our finished coloured images using various different techniques and products. So you can see all of the differences, hopefully, between all of those different options. So we've got here the blender pens, the Wink of Stella. This one was watercoloured using the ink and watercolour painters. This is again using the pencils and water using the aqua painters, and again this is just the ink and painters on this fluid 100 cardstock. So lots of different sort of looks that you can get out of a couple of different types of colouring techniques, and these are all going to give different sort of finished looks to your projects. So pick the one that is going to work best for the kind of project that you are trying to put together. One thing I will mention, once you have used ink in the lid of a stamp case like this, just to make sure that you don't end up with this sort of watery ink going back onto your your ink pad, not your stamp pad. All you want to do is just taking some kitchen towel or other kind of absorbent paper, just wipe all of that out of there, and then your ink pad is ready to use again next time. Thank you for joining me in my craft room today. I really hope that you have enjoyed this quick video looking at some of the different watercolouring techniques and ways to colour images using the products that Stampin' Up offer. If you have enjoyed this quick tutorial, please do consider giving this video a like. And like I said, this is going to be part 1 of a possibly 3 or 4 part series, depending on how it works out. There's a lot more that can be done with water and ink and other colouring tools. So we're going to be looking in depth at some more of those in the future. If that's something that you would like to see, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell, and then you will be alerted every single time I post a new video and you won't miss those when they go live. If you have any questions or comments about the products that I've used today or what I've done with them, please do pop them into the comments box below. I'd be absolutely happy to help you out. If you are based in the UK and you don't currently have a copy of our current catalogues, there is a link in the description box to the web form directly on my website where you can request those, and I'll get them straight out into the post for you. Thank you again for joining me today for this Tip Tuesday video, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.